welcome.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cybersecurity Leadership Series organized by Cyber Houston. I'm very excited to have you join us today. Our power panel is stacked with industry experts, and we'll be discussing the recent Colonial Pipeline Ransomware Attack. It's really interesting. As cyber defenders, we've been dealing with ransomware for years, and we find ourselves still on the losing side of this battle. Colonial Pipeline is the largest fuel pipeline in the US and provides up to 45% of all the fuel in the Northeast. And it's really cybersecurity, this is metastasized beyond a cybersecurity incident. It's creating societal issues, economic issues, and really some fear and panic that we saw with different behaviors of people during the potential gas shortages. And we're going to discuss their plight with ransomware and shed light on critical considerations and some that no one else is talking about. Before we get started, just a quick housekeeping note. Post your questions and comments in the chat section, and we'll do our best to get to all of your questions and answer them here live. I'm John Volanti, Senior Vice President of Information Security at Allegiance Bank. I'm covering for Umesh, and hopefully, Umesh, if you're watching, you'll find favor with how we do today. Joining us today is a hand-picked group of experts from Cyber Houston. We truly will have something for everyone. Cyber Houston is a Department of Homeland Security recognized ISAL. We're a coalition of volunteers representing leaders from business, cybersecurity, academia, government, and individual civic leaders. Our goal is to continuously educate and inform business leaders on how to manage and govern cybersecurity risk. Today, I'm challenging everyone to learn 3 things from today's session. Then take away what you've learned and find a way to operationalize it. Find a way to change a process, procedure, or a security control to make your organization more resilient. It's my pleasure to introduce our panel. Mr. George Crawford, CIO, CISO, partner at Catapult Energy Services.
Hey,
Mr.
John.
Jack, welcome, George. Glad to have you. Jack Hannegriff, Mayor's Office of Public Safety and Homeland Security with the City of Houston. Good morning, Jack. Andres Ruz, Director of Information Security at Novo Payment.
Hey guys, how are you?
And finally, perhaps the panelist with the coolest name ever, Pierluigi Stella, Chief Technology Officer,
Yes.
NetworkBox USA.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. I'm really glad you could make it. I picked all of you for a reason, and we're going to have a great session today. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get straight to it. Andy, I'd like to throw the first question over to you. So at its heart, ransomware is nothing more than a form of malware, one with a specialized and terrifying payload. As we get better stopping all untrusted code from running, we'll protect ourselves from a range of the wares to include ransomware. What strategies do you have for our viewers and listeners to prevent all untrusted code from running?
So, John, it's interesting that you asked this question, and sadly, after the analysis that we can do in this type of attacks and in any kind of situations like a ransomware attack for our companies, what we discover is the behavioral is kind of similar to what we have seen in the past, right? 90% of these attacks come from a phishing email. So the first thing for you to start considering is how these attacks works in the whole anatomy of a ransomware. So what I can tell you that I have learned in studying very well how this attack works is that everything starts with your plan to protect the company. There's no silver bullet. You have to do your homework. You have to establish a program that makes sense for you as an organization. And it starts at the very, very high level with that program. Then you start defining all your protections. And things like your cyber hygiene that we talk so much. You can take the CIS controls that now are 18, not 20, in version 8. You can take that as a guiding principle. You can take the NIST cybersecurity framework, and that will establish at least a guiding of where you should go. Now, things that we talk so much, but still there's a lot of people that are not doing is, the anti-phishing solutions, the patching, the multi-factor authentication for users. A lot of the things that DarkSide was using is attacking the VPN infrastructure in the companies in one of the UNCs. So some of that we have covered, in a lot of these sessions, but we still are falling short. And one thing, to me that is important as a cybersecurity person that works in the field, we need to have in consideration how we respond. What is your incident response plan? Because this will happen. We all know that some kind of attack will happen to us. So we have to have a very strong incident response plan, and you have to test it. You have to go through tabletop exercises with your team. You need to understand how to react. What is the first thing to do? You and I have been talking about the CISA ransomware guide that is over there. Thank you, Jack, for that. So there's documentation that we can use to take advantage that is free for every organization to respond to these events. And one last thing that I think is probably one of the things that I would recommend everyone to start thinking is the zero trust architecture. A lot of things of these attacks are coming from maybe people having too many rights, too many access that they probably don't need. When you provide a layer 3 VPN access to all your infrastructure, for someone who is, I don't know, an accountant, you don't need that, right? So you need to start moving in that direction. You need to start controlling better, your access. You need to start controlling better how you provide those access so you can contain when these things happen and it's not such a nightmare.
Thanks, Andy. I mean, you bring up some really good points. And for those of you who have never seen the Verizon Data Breach and Investigation Report, the report on 2020 was released, I think, yesterday or late last week. So that's available for download. And Andy mentioned phishing and essentially human behaviors. And, in that 119-ish page report, what we learn is up to 85% of all the breaches investigated by Verizon and their partners were the result of human behavior. Clicking on a phishing link, misconfiguring an application, especially if it's in the cloud, and otherwise just making mistakes, errors, and misconfiguration. So we, as humans, are a great last line of defense as a firewall, but we're also, we represent risk to each of our organizations.
Do you mind if I interject?
Oh, please.
A little bit of devil's advocate, because we as a security professionals have a tendency to push the blame on the users. And by all means, if we could get rid of the users, we'd all be much happier. But we also probably be out of the job anyway, right? So it is our duty to protect them. Now, as a vendor in the space, I see behavior in the people I interact with. There's nothing to do with users' behavior, but it's security professionals and IT behavior. I did a survey of the configurations of all our clients today, and I can guarantee you that most of them still today do not want HTTPS decoding, for example, right? So what is HTTPS decoding? It's the only appropriate way to protect your browser from an attack, because most of the traffic, I think 90% of the traffic is on port 443 is encrypted. If you don't decode it, you can't scan it. And if you can't scan it, the stuff gets straight through to the workstation. And then you're infected. There are steps that you can take along the way for your ransomware readiness, protection readiness, right? And I am 100% in agreement with everything that Andres said, the email protection, anti-phishing, but there are also many email protection systems that today don't do DKIM and SPF checking.
Yeah.
That's just unseen. How do you stop phishing if you don't do these things properly? Yes, you won't stop 100% of them, but maybe you'll stop that one that's going to infect you. And then once down the road, the emails get to the users. If the user does click, why is the clicking going out and being allowed to actually go out? Why aren't you intercepting it with some layer 3 application protection that will detect the remote IP address being a danger, or with the URL being a danger? Or if you don't recognize all of those, scan the traffic as it's coming back through to see that, maybe this is an executable he's downloading. Or let me take a look at this, right? Sandbox it, quarantine it, stop it, do something, right? But if we don't do all of this together, that's what we keep saying I've been doing this since 2003. We keep talking about layered security. This is what layered security means. You can't stop it at the email level. you have to stop it somewhere else. If you don't put together all of the potential tools that you have available, somewhere, somehow, they're going to get through.
Pierluigi, those are some really great comments. And what it makes me think about is what I think is a misperception in the community of defenders. We often think that offense only needs to get it right once, and we have to get it right all the time. But what Pierluigi just stepped us through essentially is a threat modeling exercise that follows the attack from cradle to grave. And each step along the way, the attacker has to achieve a very discrete objective. And every single moment across that continuum is an opportunity for us as defenders to detect and prevent bad things from happening. So the concept of threat modeling is really important, and stepping through what does that attack really look like? And based on the various security controls in your environment, how are you going to see it and how are you going to stop it? And Pierluigi, I'd like to come back to you with a question about detection. Many organizations in general struggle to detect breaches impacting their environments. And we often look at dwell time as a key measurement to rate the effectiveness of a security program. Right now, typical dwell times are 100-ish days. Just a few years ago, it was routinely over a year. Yeah. So attackers are running around inside of victim networks for a very long time before it's identified, but it actually gets worse because in many cases, the identification of the breach happens by a third party. It doesn't even happen by the company. And ransomwares change this to a degree because once the attackers steal and encrypt the data, they display the ransom letter to the victim, dwell time is shorter, and that notification is painfully obvious. But what I don't hear anybody talking about is how can we detect the attack before the ransom letter is provided? What are some new things that people should be considering to detect that pending ransomware letter?
This is I should ask you, how many hours do I have? So let's start on that. Let's try to be brief. So, right? So yes, okay. So first of all, when you get ransomware, you are immediately painfully aware of the problem. There is no detection. There is no, right? It's your stuff is encrypted. You can't get to your data. You're done. However, some more modern ransomware doesn't act in such a harsh and rash way. It gets in and it distributes and then it attacks all at once. So a detection inside the network to prevent this movement horizontal is important, right? And we have tools for that. However, in 2021, I still hear the objections of budget and the board of directors and auditors. I have literally had some people tell me, I'm not going to do it until the auditor tells me I have to do it, right? Or I don't have the budget. Well, guess what? I know, we all know, we run companies, right? I'm part of a company too. So I understand the idea of budget. It's not that I don't understand it. But what I don't understand is why 5 years ago you didn't put in the budget. By today, you should have had something to prevent these things and try to be a hack. You don't have the budget. The hacker isn't going to call you and say, hey, do you got budget for that? Okay, let me get in then. It doesn't work that way. If you don't have the budget, you are the next target. So find a way to get the budget. So what tools do you need? The most traditional one, I would say, at this point, that I suggest and recommend everybody is a true and tried and true CM. Right? Not a log management system, please. Let's go the step beyond. If you are just logging your data, all you're doing is you're collecting data so that when they do attack you, you can call somebody to do forensics and find out how and when they attacked you. You're not going to prevent anything. And while the CM is not a preventative tool, it can help you mitigate the attack before or while it is starting. If it is a good CM, they will find out what anomalies are happening inside your network and alert you right away so that you can pull the plug. Sometimes you can literally go to the machine and pull the plug because there's something happening. I am that adamant that you need to be immediate into taking action against when you find an anomaly that looks like a possible attack. Recently, though, I have come across some new tools, new technologies that are being now brought to the market that are very intriguing. All this threat intelligence that we have been talking about for years, like you were mentioning a report earlier from a very large company that does threat intelligence for a living. There are many companies that do this around the world. They have trillions of records of with honeypots and from other threat intelligence of the behavior of every single IP address in the IPv4 space for the last 10 years. So if your IP address at your bank has been sending out malware, they know. Now, how does that help you? Well, it helps you because you can get a report from them. And by the way, your report one time is free. And I'm not going to tell you the name of the company because I'm not here to publicize anybody. But it's an amazing report that literally gives you a score like your FICO, what's it called? The personal score with your banks.
Credit score.
Thank you. And it measures what they have seen for your IP addresses in your domain in the last 1, 2, 3, 4 years, right? So if during those 4 years, at some point, your system was sending out malware, spam, or you was reaching out to a botnet or to a ransomware download, they know, and they will report it. Now, how is that important? How does that help you? Well, combined with the CM, this kind of report can help you scratch your head and say, there's something wrong in my network. And what we're trying to do here is reduce the time that you were mentioning before from a year to 100 days to maybe a couple days, right? If you can get this report right away, maybe you can reduce it combined with your CM. The final scope here is to get to the point that we can intervene almost right away. So you avoid the spreading and avoid, therefore, the consequences. Now, with what Andrea said earlier about blocking it before it comes in, and the CM and these other technologies intervening if it does come through, you should be in a position where if you can't 100% avoid it, at least you can definitely contain
it. Can I add something, maybe as a question for Pierluigi? Pierluigi, you and I know that the budget is essential, but also the knowing of the solution, because we have so many people who have a SIEM that they don't use it, right? They just collect dust, or they don't have a way to automate the response. So having someone who also, to me, it's always, it's also process and people, besides the solution.
Definitely. You can't just buy it. See, a SIEM is not a firewall. Okay? Obviously, a firewall isn't something you buy and live there, but a SIEM even more so. It's not something you install it and walk away. A SIEM needs to be tied with a very good threat intelligence system that feeds the information in order to recognize the anomalies. It needs to be monitored. Most importantly, if I may, the new CMs are tied to machine learning. Some people like to call it artificial intelligence. I wouldn't go that far because artificial intelligence has to have the aspect of prediction. They're not predicting anything. They are telling you that something is different from usual, right? So they are finding out anomalies. The problem with the CM is that if I don't have most of those that are rule-based, that's a limitation. A rule, I can think of a rule, and if the rule is met, I raise an anomaly. But if the rule is not met, I can still be attacked, and I don't catch it because I didn't think of the attack. I didn't create the rule. The machine learning system will, over time, learn the proper and normal behavior of your network, and then alert you when there is something that looks different. Does it mean that every time it alerts you, it's an actual attack? No. But you help train the system that way, and over time, it becomes better trained to alert you only when there is something really that needs to be looked at. And there are a few companies, including mine, that do this today. I have to say that, I'm sorry. They do this today. And not obviously, there are a few companies that do this, and it's important because the way the CM needs to behave, there is no better way than machine learning. That's the reason why for the global spending on cybersecurity is approaching $200 billion. The global spending on CM 2 years ago was $2 billion, so 1% of the whole global spend. It's ridiculous. The reason why that is because the past CMs were nothing more than log aggregators with a few rules, and if you didn't think of the rules, you didn't catch anything, and therefore they weren't so useful, right? The new CMs that are coming on the market, that are on the market already today, are much more useful and do help a lot more.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, today we're talking about ransomware and specifically the impact it had with Colonial Pipeline, but we're going to get to a different type of attack family at some point in the future that we're going to be spending more time on. And there are attackers who are building their roadmaps right now to poison machine learning algorithms and models so that they can continue to sneak their true attack even past machine learning. So it's really an interesting space. And I might sound like a little bit like a broken record. I'm going to talk about threat modeling again, because Pierluigi talked about the power of the SIM. And if we're not putting the right data into the SIM, the right events, then we're not going to see what we need to see. And we know that attackers escalate privilege. We know that they move laterally by stealing, using stolen credentials. So what does that look like in your SIM? And are you gathering the right data? There's a number of agents that work with SIMs. So you think about Sysmon from Microsoft. It's free. It gathers tons of telemetry. So make sure you've got the right audit policies enabled, that you're looking at PowerShell commands with the full command line switches, et cetera, so that you can see what a running process looks like. Malware must run to create harm. It can hide, but it must run. And being able to detect those rogue running processes is really critical. And let's see here from Nadeem. So who wants to talk about using isolated virtual desktops, maybe streaming applications and isolating, containerizing dangerous applications? So, and I would say, right, if we think about the most dangerous things we do with our computers, it's surf the web and engage in email. So I would think that those are prime applications for containerization or isolation of some nature. Maybe it's a VDI deployment. What do you think about that, guys?
I think, when you talk about virtualization and again, I'm going back to the concept of zero trust, right? So we have to remove ourselves from this concept that everything should have access to everything. You should have to start compartmentalized, and this can be at any layer in the OSI, right? So you should work it out in a way that you can say, when I, as you say with the browser, right? There's a lot of solutions today that they will sandbox the browser when you access the your banking page, or you will have a different browser when you have to input your PII or your credit card information or even your PHI, and those are the things that we're looking as a tendency that things are going, that where you have much more specialized type of access for certain type of applications. And it's not any longer I connect my cable and suddenly I have everything and I can go everywhere I want. So there has to be, and this I'm going back to what Pierluigi said, right? This is our responsibility, is not the user responsibility. Our responsibility of security is to create that architecture and design so we can actually protect the people, because we know that this will come from 20,000 places. So we have to create the architecture that will protect them.
And I think it's really difficult to provide an outright answer to the cost versus benefit of this question. Every organization is different. Your intellectual property across organizations is going to be different. The budget that you already have and how you protect it is different. And this is something that VDI is expensive. If anyone's done a VDI deployment, it's expensive. And there can be issues with application latency. So you're going to need a great partner to help implement any type of a VDI solution. I don't think that's a roll it by yourself type of a project.
I tried deploying VDIs about maybe 10 years ago when they were just relatively new, and the problem we had was latency and the speed. If you are putting them in the cloud, you better have a very, very solid, stable, fast connection. Because when I'm on my desktop and I press the mouse and it moves, that's the kind of experience I want. If the VDI is sitting in Virginia and it takes 3 seconds for the mouse to move, I'm not going to like that.
No.
That's one problem. The other problem is that VDI or not, VDIs can still be attacked. And I think Nadim was more referring to containerization and Dockers, things like Dockers. Problem, everything we try, there's a sentence that I learned many years ago. Anything built by a human can and will be broken by a human. It doesn't mean that we have to throw the towel and give up, but it just means then that, we're moving things to Docker and to containerization. And then Docker, about a year ago, I think, had a major vulnerability that was allowing cross-contamination between the various containers. I didn't keep track of it enough. I'm guessing it was fixed, but you're not moving to a different place that has no problems. You're just moving the problem from one place to another. It becomes a different problem, maybe, but you're still going to have a problem. Right? The diskless workstation is the one I like the most.
It's a classic race condition, right? So whenever we use new technology, we as defenders are racing to find something better and safe, but the attackers are in a race against us to figure out how to abuse it and leverage it against us.
Exactly.
So, George, we're lucky enough to have you here on our panel. And when I thought of Colonial Pipeline and the ransomware issue that they had, obviously you came straight to mind with your position in the industry. And what we're really seeing is hydrocarbons are coming out of the ground in some very inconvenient locations. And industrial control systems, SCADA networks are increasingly being connected to the internet for remote access by engineers, operators, technicians, what have you. What are your thoughts on best practices as it pertains to OT and IT and ransomware?
Oh, well, that's, and sorry for the technical difficulties I was having earlier, but I think maybe someone from a ransomware perspective is trying to get to me. But so, yeah, that's a great question. And it's one that is near and dear to my heart because I actually talk to a lot of different boards and C-suites associated with this very question. So, yeah, the main problem is exactly what you're saying. Now that, especially with the COVID and a lot of people working remotely and doing different things and wanting to connect to different environments, but also because they're finding in oil and gas, they're trying to find new ways to do things, right? And so new ways to do things a lot of time comes with all of the information and data that's available from that SCADA PLC control environment. And so they're a lot of times doing things then, and it's not really well thought through. So there is no thought process as far as, it's just a network, right? We're just going to plug it into our production network. We'll be able to access it and we'll be able to hit the internet and do all the things we need to do. Unfortunately, that creates a significant issue and one that is actually becoming more and more prevalent within what we're doing. So a lot of the terms that, air gapping and, zero trust and all of these concepts that are especially important when you start doing that. And, the one-way firewalls and things of that nature that are great solutions to be able to build into it. But not many people are doing that. So the more and more differentiation that we have between OT and IT and with what companies are doing, it's getting to be a big problem. So especially in oil and gas, and obviously what Colonial found out that, and why we don't know exact cause associated with what the Colonial, them taking that offline and the production side offline had a lot to do with it. So a lot of the things, and one of the things that you had asked me before was on the ransomware and how do we make a determination to pay for it or whatever else. So all that comes back to the planning side and the tabletop exercises. And they haven't really been performed on an OT perspective. We don't do anything associated with that. One of the things that is becoming really, really popular is a digital twin. So you basically, from an entire digitized perspective, you mirror your entire environment, and then you can do what if and your analysis and your tabletop exercises, because you can't really do tabletop exercises at the extent you want to within the OT environment, because typically it's online and you don't have the ability to do that. So the digital twins are coming into play big time. And so one of the things that I teach, and when I go out and talk to the different environments, I was talking to someone from a chemical processing plant the other day, and they basically took to cross the networks, they just plugged it into the same router. So the education process, and that's why Cyber Houston is such a great organization from an ISAL perspective, trying to disseminate information associated with what do we need to do from an OT/IT perspective, and how do we segment those, and do we need to do microsegmentations on the OT? And a lot of the concepts that apply in IT don't apply in OT and vice versa. So it's a little bit different. And one of the things that's really helpful is helping to educate the different ones out there associated with what are the things that you should do, best practices, really low-hanging fruit to prevent a lot of the things that may have occurred. Once we find out what actually did occur within the pipeline, then that'll shed some light on it for us.
That's great. Thanks, George. You know, it's interesting because I haven't seen a lot of people give kudos to Colonial. Everything we're hearing, and we won't know the full story perhaps ever, and if we do get the whole story, it's going to be much later. But everything I've heard, and somebody please chime in if you've heard something different, is that, you know, their business network, the corporate network, got hit with ransomware. It didn't make its way to the OT side, and they were in a very cautious stance. They shut down that pipeline. They shut down some systems to be very cautious. So Pierluigi, you had talked earlier today about, you know, just pulling the plug, and essentially that's what they did. And then they made a business decision. They made a business decision to pay the ransom. And I've heard it's anywhere between $4.4 and $5 million. So it's quite a bit of money. And I certainly would urge people, when you run through a tabletop exercise, you have to consider paying the ransom. Are you really going to do it? Are you not going to do it? Lately, I think it's in Ireland, HSE, the health services area, they refuse to pay the ransom, but they believe it's going to cost 10 to 20 times more to recover from the attack than to pay the ransom. And they're hiring hundreds of specialists. They lost like 2,000 servers. So as you're going through your tabletop exercise, you need to be considerate of the fact that paying the ransom may actually be cheaper. And you know, there's double jeopardy going on, because a lot of times your data is stolen as well. It gets exfiltrated, and the attackers will release it to the public unless you pay the ransom. So there's more than just your encrypted data to think about. It's the sensitivity of that data and whether you do or don't want the world to see it. And then I think in kind of a turn of events that's somewhat, I don't know the right word to use, but they paid the ransom and didn't use the decrypting tool because it was too slow. And they did end up recovering from their own backups. Whether or not they're fully restored right now, I don't know. One of the things people really need to be on the lookout for is, how are you actually going to recover? How long is it going to take? How long is it going to take your organization to rebuild 30, maybe 200 different servers and get the data restored, and making sure you don't restore infected files? It's going to be a long process. And so we talk about cyber insurance on the, hey, help me pay for digital forensic experts and pay the ransom. But what about any type of retainer from a provider that's going to help with recovery?
So a couple of comments on there. The first, I would like to add another thing that I feel that Colonial did very well, at least I feel they did very well, is that they make public the IOCs for the rest of the population to protect. So that was something that, you know, when I was hearing the SANS Institute talk about this event, they say very quickly, you know, they make the information available for other people not to suffer this, which I think is something that we all want, right? We want to help others to protect ourselves. That to me was something that they did very quickly to react to that. The second thing is when, and some of us, we have to participate in some of these events, you know, not very happy events, but when you are under that circumstances, the first person you have to call after, you know, making your communication with them, with your board, is your insurance, because insurance will not let you work with whoever you want. They will have someone who's going to be designated for you to work to negotiate with a group. So that's not something that the company normally will do by itself. It's something that the insurance, if you have one, will designate a company that they will negotiate with a group to get the price. So that's something that people don't understand. If you have not gone through one of these scenarios, you will not know. You first have to contact the insurance, because if you start the process with someone else, the insurance will not let you. You will have to change vendors, and that's not a nice place to be. So those two comments on that.
I don't know if I feel like I'm sorry. Why are we talking about paying the ransomware? That's the part that it just baffles me. Yes, it will cost you 10 times more, but have we considered how many? We're talking literally American lives are going to be lost because these people paid, and the money could end up in the hands of people like ISIS, who will use it to buy weapons to kill Americans or others. We are not. This isn't malware kiddie anymore, guys. We're talking about serious organizations that are enriching themselves at the expense of our companies, and we do not know what they're doing with that money. I am just waiting for the American government to prohibit negotiating with these people and paying ransomware the same way that they don't negotiate with terrorists, for the very reason that paying the ransom ends up financing the very organization you're trying to take down. I just don't understand. And then, obviously, from an insurance standpoint, they make a business decision. If it's going to cost me $100,000 of Bitcoin or whatever it is that they want today, and rather than $1 million on recovering and lawyers and whatnot, sure, I'll pay $100,000. Business-wise, it seems to make sense. But businesses are not just in isolated entities in a vacuum. They're part of they call themselves as citizens of this society. And if their action ends up causing harm to other citizens, they need to be responsible and think their money is going in the wrong hands. We cannot consider the idea that paying ransom is something that can be taken lightly because it's a business decision. No, it's not. It is not a business decision when your business decision ends up affecting the life of other citizens. I'm sorry. I hope that it becomes political. I don't want to make it political, but it unfortunately has to be.
It's more philosophical, but yes, you have a point. But I would tell you that, on the other hand, in some cases, you are honestly dealing with people's life, right? This is no joke. We have been in situations where you see a company of 3,000 people that if you don't do something, they're out of business. So you're playing also with people's lives. What they're going to be, those 3,000 people. So I agree with you, but it's not as an easy decision. Where
no, I never said it's easy. I never said it's easy. It's just that if you want to make the parallel, then when there are 5 hostages in Syria and they are all American citizens and the government doesn't pay, and I because I have dual citizenship, I can see this from another point of view. There were 5 Americans and 3 Italians. The Italians walked free because the Italian government paid, and the Americans stayed and risked their life. That makes you wonder, right? Which is the right position? There is ethical considerations. There is political considerations. It's obviously this panel wasn't put together for that, but I just raised the question: is it right to pay the ransom?
Well, it's one of the things that we can provide people with is assistance in planning for ransomware.
Thank you.
And the whole concept of do we pay or not pay is a huge aspect of that conversation for every organization. So you've raised a good counterpoint. And in fact, I think it was October of 2020, the Office of Treasury, I'm pretty sure they started looking at where some of these payments were going, and they have opinions about the fact that we shouldn't pay the ransom because it's funding terrorism. And I don't know if anything's made its way into regulation yet or contracts. I just don't know. But I think what we'll also start seeing is cyber insurance carriers are going to stop paying ransoms. Cyber insurance premiums are going to go up quite a bit. There'll be various exclusions to coverage. The market's going to change quite a bit. There's been way too much money lost because of ransomware. And in a very ironic twist, 2 cybersecurity insurance companies within the past few months have been hit with ransomware. So CNA paid out $40 million, and AXA got hit as well. So it's somewhat ironic.
To respond what you said, there is some obligation, and your insurance will not pay to certain destinations, because I have been in an exercise that happened. So that's already in place. What they did, the Department of Treasury did, is they should refresh those knowledge, and they actually make that a little more public for everyone to know. But that's in effect. So I know that because when we were dealing with a customer at my old job about this, they asked a couple of questions related specific to this, that they will not pay the ransom if the money was to certain locations.
Can I make a comment, John?
Yeah, of course.
So from a law enforcement perspective, I mean, law enforcement from the local, state, and federal side, they struggle with cybersecurity, cyber breaches. That's been going on for years, and just they're playing catch up. I mean, and the things are moving so fast. There's some things that there's no even laws for, and y'all have seen this in some behaviors that there's not even the appropriate law. And so law enforcement struggles with, first of all, who has responsibility for it, and then is it a business cost of doing business? Is it a crime, or is it an attack? And the Keystone Pipeline was unique. You take a normal small business that gets attacked and extorted. That's one example. Then you go all the way over to the Keystone Pipeline. That's of national interest. So there is a lot of law enforcement help in that area. But when you go to the other side of the spectrum, law enforcement tends to struggle. And I know we do that because I deal with a lot of Homeland Security grants. And in the cybersecurity space, when we're trying to map it out to acts of terrorism, we have to differentiate. Is it a business cost or is it a Homeland Security cost? But so cybersecurity and the vectoring of these attacks is very hard to define sometimes. The Colonial Pipeline was a little more well-defined. And I also have to give it to the administrators of the pipeline, because, they did some of the quickest returns. I don't necessarily have an opinion on them paying the ransom, but what they did was they immediately disconnected. That's something you always want to do is you disconnect your critical networks, your systems, your critical systems. If you can, you disconnect them to wherever the affected area is and isolate. And they were able to breathe life into the pipeline very slowly, but they were able to breathe life into it because they went manual. They started operating and moving the commodity in a manual means. You talked about the IT and the OT. Yeah, there is to this day disconnect between the IT and the OT. But it's getting better. We've seen a lot better communication over the years between the guys in the basement and the ones in the control area actually communicating and talking about what's occurring. But I just wanted to make a comment on that.
Well, Jack, I think I'd like to stay with you. As we looked at the Colonial Pipeline Ransomware Attack, there were some, pretty significant second and third order type effects from it. We saw people pouring gasoline in plastic bags and hoarding and other types of, second, third order effects. What if a Houston area refinery was crippled from ransomware, and how does this impact the mayor's office? And what are some of the government considerations surrounding what is no longer just a cyber event, but an event with very significant societal and economic impact?
So let me see if I can put some things in context, because I deal with critical infrastructure protection, our most important asset, both in the public and private side. And I deal with both physical and cybersecurity. And part of that critical infrastructure protection is interdependencies, or the supply chain. We're all dependent. You go and get groceries, and the businesses need water and telecommunications, those kinds of deals. So, over the years, through the guidance of the various administrations, specifically this administration, Mr. Turner, we've been continuing to develop and cultivate a private sector supply chain working group. Both, there's public and private stakeholders, and we convene. I mean, this is everything from your grocery stores to your fuel and oil people to communications, your water. And we convene regularly and have been convening regularly. That's why you noticed in 2020 we had a lot of events that were impacting our supply chain, and this pipeline is no different from that. But we meet and discuss problems across a broad swath of industry and businesses. And you look at the Texas Gulf region, we are the principal consumption center of refined petroleum products. And then what really gets interesting is the Greater Houston area produces 2.4 million barrels a day, 1 million around of gas, and the other is fuel oil. And then you got our Port of Houston, number one in the country in international commerce. So these types of occurrences, the pipeline's output. So it affects our output. And if you can't get your product out, you're eventually going to have to slow down your manufacturing process, because you have nowhere to go. And you made the mention of people putting fuel and gas in plastic bags and things like that. Houston is no stranger to man-made and natural disasters. We've had the hurricanes, we've had the floods, we've had accidental occurrences at refinery sites that have caused slowdowns, shutdowns, or outbound distribution delays. It's unfortunate. These are unfortunate events, but it's made us very resilient. And one thing we have to do as a city and a region is manage the public expectations. Because social media, news outlets, internet, what's occurring in other parts of the world or even the country is live in your living room, and people start thinking, "Oh, that's happening to me." It's you're feeling the effects, and you're really not. So we have to manage those expectations, and we try to put out a lot of public media products that educate the public. This is who's being impacted. The only impact we're going to see is probably a rise in costs, just like everybody else in the nation. We have a hurricane, prices change, and that affects the whole nation. Something like the pipeline changes the cost. So we have to put information. I mean, we had some self-induced shortages in the Texas area because the pipeline was shut down because of Harvey. And somebody put out on the news that there's going to be a gas shortage throughout the whole country. And so we were feeling the effects not only in Houston, but in San Antonio and Dallas and some major cities. People were doing self-induced shortages by trying to stock up and stockpile, and they created gas lines like back in the 70s, those kind of gas lines. And that's what was happening in the Northeast. So we were putting out messaging that, and this came from the experts. This came from the Texas Oil and Gas Association. We were getting messaging from them that we're not going to be infected by that. We don't need to stock up. And we really did see a lot of that, what was occurring up north and the East Coast. And I understand, what was occurring, because there was probably 4 or 5 states that were solely dependent on the pipeline for their fuel. Some other states had redundant or secondary access to fuel, but there were at least 4 states that did not. So I can see what was causing that panic up there. But we did not want to produce that down here. So we were putting out a lot of products to mitigate that.
Thanks, Jack. That's a great perspective. And we really are in such a hub of economic vitality for the nation. And that's really one of the reasons why Cyber Houston exists, is to help everybody in this very vital city of ours stay protected and manage this cyber risk. And as we think about cyber risk, we had another question come in from Nadeem on risks utilizing cloud technologies. like SaaS, software as a service, versus perhaps building your own local private cloud in your own data center. So he's wondering what our thoughts are on those risks, and I'll open it up to our panel.
Okay, so I would try to give the first bite to the question. I think that the controls that you have to have if you are consuming a SaaS is different if you have a PaaS or infrastructure as a service. Those are three different models that you consume cloud services. In each of those cases, you still have to do your due diligence to analyze what risk you're absorbing, what the company is going to be responsible versus what you are going to be responsible. All that analysis needs to happen. But something that we have talked a long time ago is to feel that because you are going to have a private cloud, you're going to be more secure than in the public cloud. In my experience to that, it all depends. It depends on what you put. It depends on how you secure your infrastructure. And to be honest with you, something that this is my personal opinion is it's going to be very hard for you to have better protection than Amazon, Google, or Microsoft. To just name some. So I know some people is scared about the public cloud and how to consume, and I understand there are some regulations about those things. But if you add the controls that you should add and you do your due diligence, to me, honestly, today, you should be able to consume those services without any problem.
And I would add that as we think about kind of the deperimeterization of our networks and the use of cloud technology, you really need to focus on three main areas: your apps, your data, and your users. And be thinking about the types of controls you can implement to prevent bad things from happening, or to detect when bad things did happen, or to accelerate and guide response activities surrounding your users, your applications, and your data. Once again, thinking about how an adversary is going to cause harm to you in that SaaS type of an environment, and back your way into those controls.
That's why the concept is moved away from just purely network security to things like data security and user security, and the concept of zero trust, where I need to authenticate you and understand who you are before I can let you in, not just because you're in the network. It doesn't mean that there is somebody typing. There's no choice. Because you're in the network doesn't mean you have access, right? At the same time, to Andrea's point and to Nadim's question, there is, I think we still are a little confused on who is responsible for what when your data is in the cloud. And that generates the fear of public cloud in many companies. I remember a diagram that NIST put together about 10 years ago, and I wish I had if I could have foreseen this question, I would have brought the picture of me. It was a very interesting model that explains that there are fundamentally three types of cloud access: the infrastructure as a service, the platform as a service, and the software as a service. In each of the three, you are responsible for different levels of security. And when you move your data and your applications to the cloud, you need to understand what the provider is giving you at what level. If they're giving you the SaaS, right? If my entire accounting is with QuickBooks in the cloud, there is nothing I can do about my data other than two-factor authentication so that nobody steals my password, and hope that they do a good job, they don't lose it. Maybe do a backup of my own if I want to be safe and not lose my books, right? Just giving you a high-level example here, but substantially, another typical SaaS is a Salesforce. Most companies that are vendors use them. If they lose my entire database, I hope I have a copy somewhere, right? Because there is nothing I can do to change whatever they are doing for their security. But if it is infrastructure as a service, Amazon, Google, Azure in certain types of services, then I need to understand that they're not giving me anything but physical security. Practically only physical security, which is great because go figure out where my data is. I love that kind of security because you cannot steal my data physically. It's probably distributed within 20 different servers in 3 data centers. You cannot steal something that's consistent that you can read, right? At the same time, my VMs are completely exposed to the internet. If I open them up, they're opened up. If I spawn a web server and I don't put anything in front of it, it's free for all. They don't do anything. They offer certain things that you can apply and you can purchase and use. But aside from that, you have to take care of that like you would your land. Why is it that we embrace a new technology and we go back in security 20 years, thinking, it's no longer my problem? That's not true.
And Pierluigi, I do have we're gonna begin to wrap it up. So I apologize for interrupting you.
Okay.
But I would certainly encourage all of our viewers to think about a SOC 2 Type 2 report of any infrastructure that's hosting your in your cloud. So if you're using software as a service, figure out what infrastructure they're using. It's either GCP, Azure, or AWS, most likely. Look at those the complementary end user controls. That is the heart of the shared responsibility model, and it'll let you know what your piece is to properly secure all of your data and your apps, because AWS, Azure, and GCP are doing some work for you, but there's a lot that you have to do by yourself. And I'd like to thank all of our viewers and listeners for being here. You've invested your time, and we certainly don't have much of it these days. I certainly hope you accepted my challenge and can take away some new information and put it into use and make your organization more resilient to ransomware. And to my experts, great panel, outstanding insights and thoughts. I can't thank you enough for volunteering your time today and for everything you do for Cyber Houston and our communities. I'd like our viewers to know that this presentation will be available on the Cyber Houston Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and the cyberhouston.org website. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow the Facebook page, remember to hit the notification button, and you'll receive updates on new cybersecurity leadership content. Here, what we're really trying to do is to take lessons learned from our larger enterprise members, distill them into sensible economical guidance to help our small and mid-sized businesses improve their cybersecurity posture and build resilience. We're here for you, and we're committed to the economic vitality of all enterprises with a sharp focus on our small and mid-sized businesses. And this guidance is available to you in a few different forms. We have a business vitality guide. There's a document on guidance for the boards of directors, and we have a cyber preparedness assessment that's available to you online and in a PDF format. And we are offering some free cyber scans. So all of those resources are free. They're found on the resources tab of the cyberhouston.org website. And I'd like to, none of this would be possible without our sponsors. So a special thanks to our sponsors, Hewlett Packard Enterprise, Blue Lance, Renica Digital, and the University of Houston Downtown. Thanks again for everything you're doing. Until later, be safe, stay healthy, and defeat the wares, especially ransomware.